All right, hello everybody. So I was looking at what build looked interesting for me to start playing at the start of the next season, and what I found surprised me because I do play mage occasionally, but sorcerer is not the thing I generally go for. And when I was reading through the sorcerer changes, I read black hole and I got pretty interested. Its skill list changes are actually not that big, but I was reading some of the things about collapse and pulsar, and I was like, what's going on here? What is collapse? Why should I play it? So I took a look, and when I pulled up collapse, I was like, okay, there's nothing here on the skill tree. So when I went over to the resources section and then looked up the skill, turns out collapse, it's a void skill. And it scales with void damage. And it has base cold damage. So it's a very weird skill, but it has added damage spell or added damage effectiveness at 300%. So it does a good bit of damage as well. So it's a void spell that does a good bit of damage and it has cold base damage. So we can give it void base damage to make it do even more. And this got me thinking. I was like, okay, what are the options, right? I wrote them down over here. I was like, what are the options that I have for void damage? One, there's Decimate, which, it is a void spell that can be cast from fire, cold, and lightning spells. And so that was an interesting option. But then there's also, the set gives you 15% more void damage to bosses. So it's pretty good already. Then there's Sacrificial Embrace, which, it gives you a bunch of flat void damage, but you sacrifice all of your crit multi, so I didn't even know if it was worth it. Celestial Doom scales with like max mana, and it seemed pretty interesting as well as something to try out. Similar to Decimate, it's something that goes alongside your elemental abilities, and depending on which one you cast, you can cast Celestial Doom a bunch of times. And then Omnividence, obviously it's the staff that you use with Smite in order to do a ton of spell damage that's void. I was wondering if it had any sort of use case in my builds, just because it has so much damage in for Void. But I don't think Omnividence will really work. But I do think Celestial Doom, Sacrificial Embrace, and Decimate are all builds that probably exist right now. But the build I came up with is a little bit different. So I looked at Lament of the Lost Refuge, and it is a spear, which is different than the normal mage weapons, right? Because spears are generally, not mage. But the benefit of being a spear is that you get to equip the melee attack speed affix on the prefixes. So that means that we can run a melee skill in order to generate mana and then cast our volcanic orbs. And this is turning our volcanic orbs to void. So that's already a pretty good synergy, right? So we have volcanic orb and black hole both triggering void damage. But there's even more, right? Because we get corrupted heraldry from our volcanic orb. And this gives us movement speed and mana regen, which is nice. But more importantly, it gives us 5 flat spell damage per stack of corrupted heraldry. And you can get up to 12 stacks, I believe, which is 60 flat void damage. And that 60 flat void damage is added both to Collapse, which has a 300 added damage effectiveness, and to Volcanic Orb, which has 200 added damage effectiveness. So both are getting the buff from this. So let's talk a little bit about how we're connecting all the dots, right? So we have Lament of the Lost Refuge, giving us the flat damage that we need in order to make this work. It's also giving us up to 108 void spell damage just as an implicit to the spear, which is another huge buff to our base damage. Then in Volcanic Orb, because it's already being converted to void from our spear, we're pretty much just taking everything that gives us more hit damage. So anything that gives us more ore damage and more hit damage we're taking. So we're taking Explosive Ground, we're taking Infernal Caster. I might not go for Explosive Ground. I think it does a lot of damage, so I'm taking it. But I'm not sure. This is all tentative, right? As this is like a season starter. So everything that says more orb damage, we're going for. And we're not really converting it because it's being converted to void, so it's not worth taking it like Frozen Orb or anything like that. So that's the idea with Volcanic Orb. It's being casted in order to give us the stacks. And then we're taking Black Hole and we're going into the collapse part. So we want it to collapse every second. And then we have a bunch of more damages on the Black Hole, because I believe the way it works is that anything triggered from Black Hole will inherit its more damage, I believe. So if I'm wrong about that, this is all going to change. But we are taking the more damage over here, more damage, increasing the duration as much as possible, and then going for the more damage over here to bosses and enemies. So Black Hole scales with a cold tag, but it will get all the like flat damage from our void damage. So if you look here, spell damage is added at 800% effectiveness and it persists for 2.75 seconds. So basically we're going to be getting like the 200 flat void damage that we're added like times 8, right? So we're going to get 1,600 flat damage added. So even if we aren't, turning Black Hole into our damage skill, it is just going to do a lot of damage in general, and it's going to seek out the targets. So that should work. And in case we need more skill points, we can take that in the future. So those are going to be our primary sources of damage for the build. Aside from that, in order to maintain our mana, because Volcanic Orb costs a lot of mana, it costs 50, and then we might be increasing the mana over here with things like Infernal Caster, and then same for Black Hole, it costs a decent amount too at 35. So considering these are both like relatively high mana cost skills, we need Mana Strike in order to maintain its mana. And then our Mana Strike, we're giving it attack speed and then giving it global spell damage per enemy hit. So we're going to make it amp our damage as well as generate a lot of mana. So mana generated plus 80%, and then another plus 9 flat mana from Arcanist Blade, and then turning that a little bit into ward over here from Mind Warden. So this is pretty good in terms of like ward generation, defense, and mana generation. And then we're turning it into cold as well, just to synergize more with our black hole, which is also cold. We're taking Flame Ward. Flame Ward is pretty much the generic good default ability on mage. It's like our best defensive ability for any sorcerer. So we're increasing its duration and then taking a bunch of the less hit damage and less elemental damage taken, and it gives us like a nice boost in ward whenever we take it. So Flame Ward's just doing that job for us. And then Enchanted Weapon, I'm not too certain on this yet, but I think I'm going to take it just because we can cast it for free over here with efficacy, and then we can auto cast it with Kindling Blade, so it's pretty much free, and then we just get a bunch of melee attack speed with it. So that's essentially increasing our mana strike, yield just from this. So we're keeping our mana up a little bit better with this skill. I still have 7 points floating because I don't know what to do with it yet. So as you can see, it's not a decided skill. Okay, so that's how the skills kind of work together. We're using our mana strikes all the time in order to generate mana for our 2 other skills, and then we're going to use our 2 other skills off of cooldown just to do our primary damage, right? But how do our items synergize with this, right? So we have Lament of the Lost Refuge, which we already talked about, giving us a ton of flat damage and giving us pretty much the core of this build is giving us the melee attack speed as well. We're then going to take Grasp of the Blood Mage to give us flat crit, so we get up to 4% flat crit over here. It's pretty decent, but it's not enough to cap our crit, so we might need to take some other things in order to cap our crit. We're taking Titan Heart to give us a good amount of increased health. It's pretty reasonable to get a 2 LP Titan Heart, so maybe at the start you'll only have 1 LPs and that'll be good enough with a tier 7 health, but given the fact that it has so much flat health on there and you get the 15% less damage taken, it seems like a pretty good option over here. Unless, I haven't done the research yet, but unless there's like a really good affix that you want to take here, you can take that instead. Decayed Skull, once again, seems like a really good pickup because it's pretty easy to get with LP. We're getting less, armor mitigation applying to damage over time, which is always a good stat to get, and it gives us increased void damage, which is pretty good. So I'm taking it there, but in case I need like more suffixes or something, I can just drop this for like a generic exalted item and I won't really be losing out. So this is one that's really replaceable. We're taking Legends Entwined because on our ring, basically while leveling, we're going to want to use Keflahan's Cryolith. I think that's what it's called. The cold volcanic orb ring. And then if we can eventually get to it, we want to slam it onto an exalted ring and get increased void damage alongside that, because we don't really need to worry about it casting all the time because we should have enough auto attack speed to make it work. We want the exalted just so that in case we need, like poison resist or necrotic resist or some sort of resist, we can get it. If not, we can slam health on the suffix. So that's a pretty good slot there. So that's like a huge source of damage for us, right? Because we're going to get 120% increased damage. We're also going to get the set affix, which will give us all stats to our Legends Entwined and give us +1 to all our skills. So that's going to be pretty strong there. I'm taking Citadel Boots here because I'm pretty sure like you just need a good pair of exalts over here to give you health and move speed. There's nothing else you really need on this slot. So that made a lot of sense to me. And then Vessel of Strife is going to get a pretty handy use here because one, it gives us mana, which is generally useful for us because we are a sorcerer. And because we're a sorcerer, we're going to, in our passives, which I haven't gone over yet, but mana generated will be gained as ward, at least a part of it. So as a sorcerer, we do like to have more mana just so we can generate more ward, and we don't run out and stuff like that. And then void spell damage and increased void damage is also pretty handy over here. Something that was interesting that I didn't decide to take but could be a good take would be Anchor of Oblivion, because it gives a little bit more increased void damage, but also it does Wave of Void, which does scale off of flat void damage. So, that could be interesting, but that really only matters when we drop below our endurance threshold, which is not the goal of this build, right? We want to be like sort of generating a lot of ward with our mana strikes, and then our spell casts, so maybe not really that one. And then finally, I wanted to use the Abandoned set over here because it's a pretty free set bonus. We don't really use the set bonus, so you might be wondering like, why are you taking this instead of Nihilus? Like you could just take like a Nihilus or something like that, +2 to all. And I did see a couple really interesting bases that have been added now to the corrupted items, right? With the Cursed Coin Amulet, which gives you, +1 to all skill levels, which could be pretty interesting, or Dead Star Amulet. Those are also like an interesting base. It's just, I don't really know how the corrupted thing is going to work out. So as a pretty safe bet, things we want are crit multi, void damage, health, and then armor shred because we're doing hits. So those are the stats that we're slamming on our amulet, and we're literally just sealing the set affix just for the bonus that we're getting with Legends Entwined, +1 to all skills, and then up to +5 to all res and all attributes, right? So that's our goal there. This is not too much of an attribute stacker. We're not running any red rings. We literally just get a little bit of crit chance from our amulet. But from our passives, which I haven't gone over yet, we do care about attributes. So we care about intelligence because increasing our intelligence gives us spell critical strike chance per intelligence 3%. So we want to stack intelligence just to get more spell crit. And then on our Spellblade passive, we are going to take Defender of Welrin in order to get 8% increased critical chance per dexterity. So dexterity and intelligence are both going to scale our crit chance. And then we do want to get as much base crit as possible to make this better, basically. So as you can see, we have 20 dex and then 85 intelligence, and that's kind of the goal with this build. I don't think we'll be crit capped yet. We might have to get some more somewhere, but just theory crafting, right? So with our mage tree, it's not too important. We're literally just taking intelligence, attack and cast speed, and then ward retention. Nothing special there. I'm actually going to talk about Spellblade second because this tree is super important for us. We want Arcane Warden just for the intelligence, and then Elemental Affinity for the resistance. Then we want to take Infused Weapon so that we can get to Frozen Steel because this gives us damage against Frozen or Chilled, 6%. So 6% more damage is pretty good just in general. Arcane Shielding is a pretty good source of defense, right? Because Arcane Shield occurs whenever you directly use a melee attack and hit one enemy, which we will always be using Mana Strike, and then it gives us less damage taken. So it makes us tankier, and then we can have 4 stacks of it, so we're going to have 16% less damage taken whenever we have this up. That's pretty powerful there as well, and then we're going to get more melee attack speed and more generated with Essence Duel whenever we're hitting with a melee attack, and then increased armor per Arcane Shield as well. So that's a ton of defenses over here in the Spellblade tree, alongside the crit chance that I mentioned previously. With the Sorcerer tree, it's a little bit less important. We're actually only going Sorcerer just so we can get access to Black Hole, right? Otherwise, the Spellblade tree makes a little bit more sense. But we're going to take some of the mana stuff because that's pretty nice for us, and then some of the spell damage and ward retention stuff from Afterglow and Lost Knowledge. This is just because generating ward is going to be super important for us as we're in melee range. It'll be a little bit hard for us to maintain our health otherwise, which is why we're focusing so much on defense as you've seen so far. And then critical strike chance and critical strike multi are pretty handy because we are a crit build. And then we're going to go into Arcane Insight just for the Ward Decay per intelligence and just flat intelligence for our crit. And then finally, we want 3 points into Mana Well and then 5 points into Archmage just so that we can get our mana regen and mana spent gains as ward. So increasing our ward a little bit more. I still have 4 points on this. So this is like assuming you get to level 96. For a starting planer, I think this is okay. Looking at things like our resistances, they're not fully capped, but I haven't set any idols, so assuming we can just slam them in our idols, we can get it from there. Our armor is pretty decent. It's 3,000, and you might say that's kind of low, but with our with our augments to, what is it called in Spellblade, with our augments to Arcane Ages, I think we should be able to get to like 4k armor, which is decent, but we're not really a strength stacking build, so we won't get that much more than that. So it's okay. It's not the best, but it's okay. We also have the damage reduction from Titan Heart, which is pretty handy, and a lot of flat health, so we should be able to leech up pretty decently, I think. So I'm not too worried about that. We just need to make sure to get leech from somewhere after all. So I think these extra passive points are going to go into the Sorcerer tree, into the, the Cold tree, just to get a little bit of Cold Leech, right? Just so we are leeching a little bit alongside our word generation. Then looking at our offenses in general, the spell crit is a little bit low, so I need to find a way to resolve that still. But we do have a ton of flat void damage being added, so it's 114 over here, plus a decent amount of increase. It's not the greatest. I'm not sure if this will be an Uber build, but like this is probably what I'm going to league start because it looks pretty fun. And then that doesn't really include things like Corrupted Heraldry, right? So we don't really have that in place there. Then looking at our defenses, we have 50% reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes, so that's decent. That's mostly coming from our Citadel boots. So we want to get a good roll there. And then ideally we can get blind chance or something somewhere just so we don't have to really worry about it. But we should be okay in terms of defenses. It's not the greatest, it's not the worst. 300% ward retention is okay. Ideally you'd be at 400. But if you look at our effective HP, it's decent, right? I'm not sure this is going to be an Uber build. I really have to experiment with it in order to like understand where the damage is coming from, but I think this is looking like a decent build going forward. We have a ton of more multipliers, and if more multipliers work the way I think they do, because I don't really remember all the time, all our more multipliers in Volcanic Orb will of course apply to